The police officer thought the young man in front of him was just like any other black man he'd stopped, until the powerful business card was shown, which shocked the police officer. And not only that, this small stop turned the entire police force upside down. After 12 relentless hours at DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, Samuel Baker wanted nothing more than to reach his new home in Sunnyside Heights, while his Tesla glided smoothly along Sunnyside Lane, with soft music drifting through the speakers to ease the day's tension. Then his phone vibrated with an urgent sound before he glanced at the screen, a message popping up that made him check his rear-view mirror before gently pulling over to the side of the road in front of a large Victorian house, with a wraparound porch glowing under the soft floodlights. Once the car stopped, he reached for his phone and opened a text from his boss, Elon Musk, which read, "Samuel, I need the Q2 project report right now." With steady fingers, he typed back, "Yes, sir. Give me 5 minutes to upload the file," while waiting for the report to load. In that moment, he lowered the window, and the sharp scent of freshly cut grass rushed in. Yet he didn't notice the patrol car creeping closer until its red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror, accompanied by the siren's piercing wail. Right after, the cruiser swung in at an angle, blocking Samuel's Tesla with practiced precision. Meanwhile, Samuel remained in the car, a man of 27 dressed in simple elegance. A tailored black suit pressed sharp, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and a silver watch gleaming on his wrist. The smooth hum of the engine faded into the background music as he divided his attention between Elon's request and the approaching police. Then a policeman paused at the car door before tapping his knuckles against it, his sharp blue eyes scanning relentlessly, his teeth clenched with unwavering determination. "I'd like you to lower the window," the officer said, his voice firm and authoritative, a low rumble cutting through the night. Not wanting to keep him waiting too long, Samuel reached over to turn off the music before lowering the window further, the panel sliding away with a faint screech. The voice outside grew louder as the officer leaned in. "Hello, this is Sergeant Christopher Roberts. I need to check your license and registration." His gaze flicked over Samuel, then darted toward the Tesla and the Victorian house looming behind them, the corners of his mouth twitching with suspicion as his flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. At 50, Roberts looked every inch the veteran cop, buzz-cut blonde hair catching the light, years etched into his weathered face, and an itch for control simmering beneath his solid muscular frame. His uniform stretched tight across broad shoulders. With deliberate calm, Samuel reached into the glove box, pulling out the documents in a slow, measured motion. "Here," he said, handing them to Roberts with a slight nod. His fingers slid lightly over the steering wheel's leather, steady as ever, though he felt Robert's gaze pressing like a searchlight hunting for flaws. Roberts snatched the papers, stepping back as his flashlight swept over the documents. "What are you doing parked here?" he asked, his voice cold as ice. "This your place?" "No," Samuel replied, his tone even and unshaken. "Just pulled over to check a message. Work stuff." "Work stuff," Roberts echoed, a sneer curling his lip. He glanced at the house again, its dark, silent window staring back, then returned to Samuel with a skeptical squint. "You live around here?" For a split second, Samuel paused before saying, "I live a few miles away," his eyes darting toward Sunnyside Heights. Robert's eyebrows rose as a flicker of disbelief crossed his face. Sunnyside Heights was posh. Gated driveways and infinity pools lined its streets. But he muttered, "Really?" while flipping through the registration, his fingers moving as if expecting a lie to leap out. "What do you do?" he asked. "I'm an office worker," Samuel said simply, his gaze steady and unwavering. Roberts snorted, a dry, humorless sound breaking the silence. "Sounds good." "Step out of the car," he said, his other hand resting on his gun holster. Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, yet he didn't hesitate. He opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, his polished loafers gleaming under the streetlights. Standing 6'2", he towered just above Roberts, his posture relaxed yet commanding. Like a man who knew his worth without shouting it. The breeze tugged at his suit jacket as leaves skittered across the road, their faint rustle trailing behind, while the night settled heavier around them. "Hands on the hood," Roberts ordered, stepping closer as his flashlight beam danced over Samuel's frame. With a hunter's focus, he searched for something, anything, to justify his gut's nagging itch, his free hand hovering near his holster. Samuel complied, placing his palms flat on the Tesla's warm hood, the metal thrumming faintly beneath his touch. "Mind telling me what this is about?" he asked, his voice calm, yet edged with steel. "Routine check," Roberts snapped, his tone sharp enough to slice through the night. "You're parked in a nice area looking like you don't belong. Gotta make sure everything's on the up and up." Samuel's jaw tightened for a fleeting second, but he held his cool. "I belong wherever I am, officer," he said, his words measured and firm, like a line drawn in the sand with quiet defiance. Roberts paused, his hand still hovering near his holster. His flashlight lingered on Samuel's face, catching the quiet defiance in his dark eyes while crickets chirped faintly in the bushes, a fragile thread in the thickening tension. Then with a slow, crooked smirk that didn't reach his eyes, Roberts said, "We'll see about that," and patted Samuel down with quick, rough hands. The air thickened as Samuel stood with his hands pressed against the Tesla's hood, the metal warm beneath his palms, while Sergeant Christopher Roberts circled him like a hawk eyeing prey. What began as a simple traffic stop morphed into something heavier, with Roberts' flashlight beam darting over Samuel's frame, searching for a crack in his calm exterior. The night pressed in, the faint chirp of crickets blending with the distant hum of traffic, yet the tension between the two men drowned out everything else. Roberts stepped back, his boots scuffing the pavement, and narrowed his sharp blue eyes. "You say you're an office worker," he said, his voice low and laced with doubt. "But you're parked out here in front of a place like this?" He jerked his head toward the Victorian house, its dark windows gleaming under the floodlights like unblinking eyes. "Looks suspicious to me. What's your real business here?" Samuel kept his posture steady, his tailored black suit catching the streetlight's glow, while his gaze held Roberts without flinching. "Like I said, I pulled over to check a message," he replied, his tone smooth as ever, though a faint edge crept in, like a blade sheathed but ready. "That's all there is to it." Roberts snorted, a harsh sound that cut through the quiet. "That's all, huh?" he muttered, stepping closer as his hand hovered near his holster. "Folks don't just stop in a neighborhood like this to check messages. You scoping this place out? Planning something?" His words dripped with accusation, each syllable heavy with the weight of unspoken assumptions, while his flashlight flicked toward the house again, as if it might confess Samuel's intent. For a moment, Samuel's jaw tightened, but he exhaled slowly, letting the tension slide off him like water on glass. "I'm not planning anything," he said, his voice firm yet measured. "I stopped because I needed to. That's the truth." With a slight tilt of his head, he met Roberts' stare head-on, his dark eyes steady and unyielding, like a man who'd faced this dance before and knew the steps by heart. Roberts' lips twitched into a smirk, though his eyes stayed cold. "Truth's got a funny way of hiding sometimes," he said, his tone sharp enough to slice through the night. "Step away from the car. Hands where I can see 'em." He gestured with a quick flick of his wrist, his broad shoulders squared as if bracing for resistance. Samuel complied, stepping to the side with deliberate calm, his polished loafers clicking softly on the asphalt. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, while the breeze tugged at his suit jacket, carrying the faint rustle of leaves skittering across the road. "You're escalating this for no reason," he said, his voice low but carrying a quiet strength. "I've given you my papers. I've answered your questions." Roberts ignored the comment, his flashlight now sweeping over Samuel's legs and torso as he patted him down again, rougher this time. "No reason, huh?" he grunted, his hands moving with a hunter's focus, searching for anything, a bulge, a weapon, a lie. Yet as his palms came up empty, a flicker of frustration crossed his weathered face, his jaw clenching tighter. "Guys like you always got something to hide," he muttered, almost to himself, while stepping back to glare at Samuel.
Before we continue the story, where in the world are you listening from? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to tap that little like button to motivate us to create more exciting stories.
Samuel's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he lowered his hands slowly, keeping them visible, and straightened up, his 6'2" frame casting a shadow under the streetlights. Guys like me? He echoed, his voice calm yet piercing, like a needle slipping through fabric. What's that supposed to mean, Sergeant? Roberts froze for a split second, his flashlight dipping as the question hung in the air. Then with a scoff, he regained his footing, his smirk returning like a mask snapping into place. You know what I mean, he said, his tone growing harder, more commanding. Don't play dumb. I've been doing this long enough to spot trouble when I see it. The accusation landed like a stone, rippling through the stillness, yet Samuel didn't flinch. You've been doing this long enough to know better, he replied, his words steady and deliberate, each one weighted with quiet defiance. You've got no evidence, no cause, just a hunch. That's not how this works. Robert's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the flashlight as his frustration boiled over. How this works, he snapped, stepping closer until he was nearly chest to chest with Samuel. I say how this works out here. You're in my area, parked where you don't belong, and I don't buy your story. His voice rose, sharp and jagged, while his free hand clenched into a fist at his side. You think you can talk your way out of this? I've seen plenty try. Samuel held his ground, his posture unshaken, though his blood simmered beneath the surface. I'm not trying to talk my way out of anything, he said, his voice low and firm, like a river carving through stone. I'm telling you the facts. You're the one making this more than it needs to be. With a slow breath, he locked eyes with Roberts, unflinching, letting the silence stretch between them, a challenge wrapped in calm. Roberts' smirk faded, replaced by a scowl as he struggled to keep control. Facts, huh? He growled, his flashlight snapping back up to Samuel's face, the beam harsh and blinding. Here's a fact. You're out here alone, in a fancy car, in a neighborhood that doesn't fit you. That's enough for me. His words hung heavy, laced with something darker, something he hadn't yet said aloud, while the night seemed to tighten around them. Samuel's gaze didn't waver, though his chest tightened with a familiar ache, one he'd felt too many times before. Doesn't fit me? He asked, his tone deceptively soft, like the calm before a storm. Say what you mean, Sergeant. Stop dancing around it. For a moment, Roberts' mask slipped, his frustration teetering on the edge of something raw. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw working as if wrestling with the words. Then with a harsh scoff, he let it snap. Fine, he spat, his voice rising like a whip cracking through the dark. You want to hear it? Guys like you, black guys, don't roll into places like this unless they're up to something. Stealing, stirring trouble. That's what you bring to America. And I'm supposed to just let it slide? The words landed like a punch, raw and unguarded, stripping away the thin veneer of professionalism Roberts had clung to. His flashlight dipped as his free hand clenched into a fist, his chest heaving with the release of something he'd bottled up far too long. For a split second, a flicker of realization crossed his face, like a man who'd stepped too far and felt the ground give. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a defiant glare. Samuel didn't flinch, his dark eyes locked onto Roberts, steady and unblinking, while his jaw tightened with a quiet fury that simmered beneath his calm. The accusation wasn't new. Hell, it was as old as the roads he drove. But hearing it spit out so plainly still stung like a fresh cut. Yet he held his ground, his 6'2" frame a pillar against the storm, as the breeze tugged faintly at his black suit jacket. That's what you think, he said, his voice low and deliberate, like a blade sliding into place. You just made your first mistake. Roberts blinked, caught off guard by the calm in Samuel's tone, but he doubled down, his smirk twisting back into place. Mistake, he sneered, stepping closer as his flashlight snapped up again, blindingly bright. The only mistake here is you thinking you can talk back to me. I've got authority here, kid, not you. His words dripped with arrogance, while his broad shoulders squared, daring Samuel to push back. Samuel exhaled slowly, letting the insult roll off him like rain on a windshield. Then, with a measured calm that cut deeper than any shout, he reached into his suit jacket's inner pocket, his fingers steady despite the weight of Roberts's stare. Authority, he echoed, his tone soft yet piercing, is only as good as the man wielding it. He pulled out a sleek leather wallet, flipped it open, and slid out a card, white with crisp black text and a gold-embossed seal. With a flick of his wrist, he held it up between two fingers, letting the streetlight catch the words. Samuel Baker, Chief of Operations, Department of Government Efficiency. Roberts's smirk froze, his flashlight wavering as his eyes darted to the card. For a moment he stood motionless, his breath catching in his throat, while the reality sank in like a stone through water. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice trailing off as he squinted at the title, then back at Samuel's unflinching gaze. His hand dropped slightly, the beam tilting away, and his weathered face paled under the streetlight's glow. "That's right," Samuel said, his voice steady as steel, while slipping the card back into his wallet. "I'm not just some office worker. I run DOGE, and part of my job? Investigating departments like yours. Cops like you." He paused, letting the words hang heavy, then leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "So tell me, Sergeant, how's your record gonna look after this?" Robert staggered back a step, his boots scraping the asphalt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. His mouth opened, then closed, his jaw working silently while his mind raced to catch up. The arrogance drained from his posture, replaced by a dawning panic that flickered in his sharp blue eyes. You can't be," he stammered, his voice cracking. Yet Samuel's calm silence smothered any denial. "I am," Samuel said simply, straightening up as he adjusted his suit jacket with a casual flick. "And here's the thing. It's not just about me. It's about every other black man you've stopped, every other person you've judged before they even open their mouth. That's your real problem, Roberts, not me." His words landed with quiet force, each one a nail in the coffin of Robert's bravado, while the night seemed to close in tighter around them. Robert's hand trembled slightly, the flashlight now dangling at his side, its beam pooling uselessly on the pavement. I was just," he started, but the excuse withered under Samuel's steady gaze. With a shaky breath, he thrust the license and registration back at Samuel, his fingers fumbling as if they burned. "Take 'em," he muttered, his voice barely above a growl, while stepping back toward his cruiser, his broad shoulders slumping. Samuel took the papers with a slow nod, slipping them into his pocket as he watched Roberts retreat. "You're done here," he said, his tone final, like a judge's gavel striking wood. "But this isn't over." The promise lingered in the air, heavy with consequence. While Roberts paused at his cruiser's door, his hand gripping the handle as if it were his last lifeline. The Tesla's headlights cut through the darkness as Samuel pulled away from the curb, the Victorian house fading in his rearview mirror, while the hum of the engine steadied his pulse. The encounter with Sergeant Christopher Roberts lingered like a bitter taste. Yet Samuel's mind had already shifted, gears turning, plans forming. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 9:47 p.m. Late, but not too late for what needed doing. As he merged onto the highway towards Sunnyside Heights, the soft glow of his silver watch caught the light, a quiet reminder of the weight he carried, not just for himself, but for everyone Roberts had ever wronged. Back at the DOGE office the next morning, Samuel sat at his desk, a sleek expanse of glass and steel overlooking the city skyline. At 27, he moved with the sharp precision of youth tempered by experience. Tailored black suit, crisp, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and dark eyes fixed on the task ahead. He tapped a key, and the screen flared to life, displaying footage from Robert's body camera, time-stamped from the night before. As the video rolled, Samuel leaned forward, his jaw tightening while the grainy image replayed the stop. Roberts' sneering voice, the flashlight's harsh sweep, and that damning rant spilling out like poison. "Black guys don't roll into places like this unless they're up to something." Samuel paused the clip, the words echoing in his head as he scribbled a note on a legal pad. Bias confirmed. Pattern likely. Then with a few swift clicks, he accessed the precinct's surveillance logs, his fingers flying over the keyboard. What he found stopped him cold. Days, sometimes weeks, with no officers clocking in at Robert's station. Empty desks, silent hallways, and not a soul on the cameras. Ghost shifts, he muttered, his voice low and sharp, like a blade cutting through fog. The precinct wasn't just sloppy, it was a shell, bleeding taxpayers dry while badges collected dust. Later that afternoon, Samuel strode into Elon Musk's office, a sprawling space of minimalist chaos, whiteboards scrawled with equations, a model rocket perched on a shelf, and Elon hunched over a tablet, his brow furrowed in thought. Samuel cleared his throat, and Elon glanced up, his sharp eyes locking onto him. "Sam," he said, tossing the tablet aside, "you look like you've got something big. Spill it." Samuel set his laptop on the desk, flipping it open as the body cam footage loaded. "It's not just one bad apple," he began, his tone steady yet urgent, while the video played Robert's tirade in the background. "This guy, Sergeant Christopher Roberts, stopped me last night, profiled me, let his racism slip, and thought he'd get away with it. But it's worse than that. He switched tabs, pulling up the precinct logs. His station's a mess. Half the time, no one's even there. They're cashing checks for nothing, while guys like him harass people on the street." Elon leaned back, steepling his fingers as the footage looped silently. "That's a hell of a find," he said, his voice low and clipped, while his gaze flicked between Samuel and the screen. "You're saying the rot's systemic, not just him?" "Exactly," Samuel replied, nodding as he closed the laptop with a soft snap. "Punishing Roberts fixes one problem, but it doesn't touch the root. We need a full overhaul. Training, oversight, accountability. I'm talking weekly reports from every officer, body cam audits, and a top-down review of every precinct pulling this crap." His words carried a quiet fire, each one landing with purpose, while his hands rested firm on the desk's edge. Elon smirked, a rare glint of approval in his eyes. "Bold. I like it," he said, standing to pace the room, his steps quick and restless. "DOGE isn't here to slap wrists. It's here to rip out waste and inefficiency. You've got the green light. Start with Robert's crew, then scale it. I want results fast. Q3 fast." He paused, turning back with a pointed look. "And Sam, don't pull punches." Samuel nodded, a flicker of resolve hardening his features as he gathered his things. "I won't," he said, his voice steady, while the weight of the task settled like armor across his shoulders. Back at his desk, he drafted the plan, a comprehensive sweep of Robert's precinct, starting with an internal investigation triggered by the body cam footage. By week's end, the orders went out. Roberts was suspended pending review, his badge yanked as the probe dug into his history. Within days, the investigation uncovered a laundry list of complaints against Roberts, unreported stops, aggressive encounters, and a pattern of targeting black drivers, all swept under the rug by a precinct too lazy to care. Yet the bigger shock was the scale. Over half the station's officers were implicated, either complicit or clocking ghost hours, their payroll a drain on the system. By the time the report hit Samuel's desk, Roberts and a dozen others were out, fired with no appeal, while the precinct scrambled to fill the gaps. Samuel leaned back in his chair, the city skyline stretching beyond his window as dusk crept in. The suspensions felt like a win, yet a question gnawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. How many more stations are like this? He tapped a pen against his legal pad, the faint rhythm echoing his thoughts, while the weight of the night before, Robert's sneer, that venomous rant, played on loop in his mind. This wasn't just about one cop or one precinct. It was a crack in the foundation, and he'd only begun to pry it open. As he shut down his computer, the office lights dimming around him, Samuel stood and straightened his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate motion. The fight wasn't over. It was barely starting. With a final glance at the skyline, he grabbed his keys and headed out, the Tesla waiting silently in the lot below. Robert's career was ashes now, but Samuel knew the real battle lay ahead. Tearing down a system that let men like him thrive, one precinct at a time. The night stretched before him, heavy with purpose, while the city hummed on, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash. The first spark ignited on X 2 days after Roberts' suspension, a grainy clip from his body cam leaking online. Samuel's calm voice cutting through the sergeant's venomous rant. Black guys don't roll into places like this unless they're up to something. Within hours, the post exploded, retweets and quote tweets spreading like wildfire on dry grass, while hashtags like racist cop and justice for Samuel trended nationwide. By morning, news outlets pounced, CNN running headlines about racial profiling caught on tape, Fox debating the footage's context, and local stations digging into Sunnyside's sleepy precinct. Samuel watched it unfold from his DOGE office, the city skyline framed in his window, as his phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications. The story didn't stop at Roberts. As the clip looped across screens, ex-users unearthed the precinct's ghost shifts, empty surveillance logs and payroll records leaked by whistleblowers, painting a picture of cops collecting checks for nothing, while one of their own harassed a black man who turned out to be a government heavyweight. Phantom cops and a racist sergeant, one viral thread dubbed it, while another user posted, "This dude Samuel Baker's a boss. DOGE chief taking down corruption one stop at a time." The outrage swelled, yet a thread of awe wove through it. Samuel's quiet defiance in the footage striking a chord, his tailored suit and steady gaze a symbol of resilience against the odds. Back at home that evening, Samuel sat on his Sunnyside Heights porch, the Tesla parked in the driveway as dusk settled over the gated neighborhood. He scrolled through X on his phone, the glow illuminating his face, while the faint hum of crickets filled the air. Posts piled up, some calling Roberts a disgrace, others demanding accountability, and a few hailing Samuel as a hero. One tweet stuck with him, a simple line from a stranger. He stood up to the badge and won. That's power. Samuel's lips twitched into a faint smile, bittersweet and fleeting, as he set the phone aside. The praise felt good, yet the weight of it pressed heavier. Each comment a reminder of how many others hadn't walked away like he had. The next day, the story hit a tipping point. Protesters gathered outside Roberts' precinct, signs waving with slogans like "End the Ghost Shifts" and "No More Bias in Blue," while news vans lined the street, cameras rolling as voices chanted for reform. Elon Musk weighed in on X, his post short and sharp. Samuel Baker's exposing what's broken. DOGE is fixing it. Stay tuned. The tweet racked up millions of views, amplifying the pressure, while Samuel's inbox flooded with interview requests. NBC, The Times, even a podcast with Joe Rogan. He declined them all, his focus locked on the overhaul he'd pitched to Elon, the gears now grinding into motion. Inside DOGE, the plan took shape. Samuel stood at a whiteboard, marker in hand, as a team of analysts mapped out the next steps. Weekly officer reports rolling out nationwide, body cam audits doubling, and a task force targeting ghost shifts in every major precinct. This isn't about one station, he told the room, his voice steady and firm, while his pen tapped the board for emphasis. It's about a system that's been coasting too long. We root it out, or it festers. His team nodded, their faces lit with purpose, as the scope of his vision sank in, a ripple from one traffic stop now threatening to reshape policing itself. Roberts' fate sealed the chapter. After the internal probe, his firing went public. A press release citing gross misconduct and dereliction of duty, while the precinct's sacked officers, over half the roster, faced the same. Local papers ran photos of Roberts leaving the station, head down, his broad shoulders slumped under a hoodie, a far cry from the swaggering cop who'd stopped Samuel that night. Yet Samuel felt no satisfaction watching it unfold on the news, his dark eyes fixed on the screen as the anchor droned on. Good riddance, he muttered, but the words tasted hollow. Roberts was a symptom, not the disease. The media frenzy peaked that weekend, a viral video montage circulating, Samuel's footage paired with clips of other black drivers recounting similar stops, their voices weaving a tapestry of frustration and defiance. "This is bigger than one man," the narrator intoned, while the screen faded to Samuel's silhouette against the Tesla, his suit sharp against the night. The message hit hard, views climbing into the tens of millions, as X erupted again with calls for justice, not just for Samuel, but for every name and face the system had overlooked. Late Sunday night, Samuel stood alone in his office, the city skyline glittering beyond the glass while the hum of his computer faded into silence. He leaned against the desk, his silver watch catching the dim light, and let his thoughts settle. The week had been a whirlwind. Robert's downfall, the precinct's collapse, and a nation waking up to the cracks he'd exposed. Yet what lingered most wasn't the victory, it was the why. Why it took his title, his connection to Elon, to turn a routine injustice into a reckoning. "Shouldn't have to be me," he murmured, his voice soft but resolute, while the weight of that truth pressed against his chest. As he grabbed his keys and headed for the door, the Tesla waiting below, Samuel paused to glance back at the empty room. This wasn't just about one stop, one cop, or one viral moment. It was a spark that had caught, a call to dismantle what was broken and build something better. With a final nod to the skyline, he stepped out, the night stretching ahead, alive with possibility. The fight had begun on Sunnyside Lane, but it wouldn't end there. Samuel Baker, at 27, was just getting started, and the system would never be the same.
If you find the situation in this story interesting, please press the like button. And if you want to hear similar stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting story.